Hello, this is Roman Gingiashvili together with Eugene Perlstein. We are back with Opening Revelations series with the help of most powerful engine in the world, Ripka 3. And today's subject is Caro Kann defense. Caro Kann defense lately experienced a lot of new ideas for black. We checked on Ripka, we polished these ideas, and as you can see, Caro Kann is today one of the very valuable weapons for black against e4. We have some ideas in well-known variations, and in some variations we haven't touched and we haven't changed anything if those positions are known as playable and good for black. So we have very interesting material, and hope after watching this DVD you will be taking Caro Kann as one of your main weapons against e4. And here is Eugene Perlstein.
Hello, Eugene is here, and I would like to show you what to do after e4, c6. As Roman mentioned, Caro Kann is really popular at top-level grandmasters. d4. Later on, we're also going to take a look at knight f3, d5, knight c3, where white typically keeps the pawn on d2. But for now, let's focus on the main line, d4, and here black plays d5.
And actually, it's difficult to say what the main line is, even after these two moves. White has several continuations. E takes d, as well as e5, knight c3, and even knight d2. But knight d2 and knight c3 will make absolutely no difference in our lecture here, because we're planning on taking on e4. So those are the main moves. And here is Eugene with one of the main continuations, knight c3.
Yes, after knight c3, we simply take on e4. Knight takes e4. And we play bishop to f5.
Now this variation was played for decades, more than 50 years, and it was very popular. White was getting, Botvinnik was playing this variation very frequently and was getting good positions. But then they found some advantage for white, so this variation was for many years back and forth on the list of the most playable positions against e4.
And now the main line is knight g3, hitting the bishop, and bishop to g6. We should also mention that there is a less popular move, knight c5.
And here is the list of continuations black can choose. Well, this move is known, and this move is known as not giving any problems to black. Black can play b6, queen c8, as well as knight d7, and after knight takes b7, queen b6, getting the pawn back. So we don't want to really pay close attention and spend much time on knight c5 move. Just use one of those continuations and look on any opening manual that will give you a very satisfactory answer to that. So main move is knight g3, and that's where Eugene is going to present you good material.
So now we just simply play bishop g6, and notice Black's idea. He's going to play later on e6, and now the bishop on g6 is much better placed than on c8, where it's going to be looking in his own pawn on e6. So this is, notice this pawn structure with e6 and c6 is the key plan for Black.
The idea is to keep, in other words, what Eugene is saying, that we want to have this light square bishop outside our pawn structure and not being locked inside Black's e6 and c6 pawn.
So after bishop g6, White has several options. The most popular move is h4, threatening to win a piece with h5. And here you have to be careful and prevent that with playing h6 yourself.
Actually, h5 is not threatening to win a piece, but it's threatening to get serious advantage. After h5, we can go bishop f5 back, and we're going to have, after knight takes a5, queen a5, check and taking, but Black is losing a lot of tempos, and White will get an advantage. So it's very reasonable to stop the h pawn from farther advancement. So the move is h6.
And now White can play immediate h5, or a more tricky move, knight to f3. Now, if White plays knight f3, you have to counter it immediately with knight to d7. In case you don't play knight d7, White is threatening to play knight to e5, hitting the bishop, and it's going to be very hard to get rid of this powerful knight on e5.
At least Black is going to lose a tempo. So knight d7 is by far the best move in this position.
And now White plays h5, bishop h7, and here White really cannot stand this powerful bishop on h7, and he plays bishop to d3 with the idea to trade the bishops.
And it makes a lot of sense because Black's bishop made 3 moves, and White bishop on d3 made 1 move, wants to exchange the bishop that made 3 moves. But in reality, White doesn't gain any time. If this bishop made 3 moves and this bishop made 1 move, White has to justify somehow 2 moves with an h pawn. So after bishop d3, bishop takes d3, queen takes d3.
And here we have 2 possible moves, knight g to f6, or the move that we recommend is e6, immediately opening the dark square bishop.
For some time, this was known, it's just move transposition. Play e6 followed by knight f6, or play knight f6 followed by e6 was the same, but it's more accurate for the idea that we want to introduce is move e6. And here is why.
And now White has 2 main lines. The one main line starts with bishop f4, with the idea to develop the bishop and take control over the d6 and c7 squares. And we're going to counter this move with the move queen to a5 check, forcing White to play bishop to d2. Because c3 doesn't really accomplish much, because now White is going to have trouble to castle with the king.
Castle queenside it is, because of the a2 pawn will be hanging. And for a number of years, bishop d2 move in this position was equivalent to bishop f4 move. And the reason for it is, if white plays bishop d2, black plays queen c7, and if white plays bishop f4, black plays queen a5 check, and since there is no c3 on bishop d2, playing queen c7, transposing to the same line. But in this case, after bishop f4, queen a5 check, bishop d2, we are not going back queen c7 and giving you the well-known line, because otherwise, if we did that, then there is no purpose to our suggestion. So we have a relatively new idea in that we're introducing. It's not our idea, but we developed some. The idea is bishop b4. Now, why we playing bishop b4 move?
The main idea of this move is to force white to play c3, and we're simply going to jump back to e7, and white has nothing better than to play c4, attacking the queen, and now...
And notice that castling kingside is not a good idea, because after knight f6, h5 pawn will be hanging, and besides, the idea of whole opening for white to castle queenside and attack on kingside.
So white has to play c4 if he wants to fight for advantage. And now we go back to c7 with our queen. So notice the subtleties of this line. In the original line that has been played many years, we play this position with the pawn on c2, but now there is a pawn on c4, and this gives black extra options, especially if white is going to castle queenside. And these extra options include very powerful attack with the move b5. So let's go back to this position. So again, the idea is we play bishop b4, forcing white to play c3, bishop e7, c4, and then we play queen c7. And in this position, the main line is castles, and black simply plays knight g2 f6. So this is very topical position for the variation. So now let us go back. And here I would like to mention that instead of bishop f4, white can also play bishop to d2, not allowing the queen a5 check. And black's plan is actually very similar. So here we start with knight g f6, castles, bishop to e7, and the only difference is earlier we had our queen on c7 and the pawn on c4. Here white has a pawn on c2 and queen on d8. In both of these positions, black's plan is to play kingside castle. and we're going to examine it in more detail. But for now, let us go back to the position after bishop to f4, queen a5 check, bishop d2, bishop b4. Is there a way white can try to punish black for playing bishop to b4 so early? Let us take a look at the move knight to e4. Actually, the knight is still on g8 here. So knight to e4. So this is the idea. Since black's knight hasn't been developed to f6 and black played bishop to b4, the idea behind knight e4 is twofold: to take advantage over the key square, and if black plays knight to f6, this allows this check, knight d6 check. Notice that taking the knight loses the queen. So is this a refutation? And the answer is no. Black is totally fine, and this is one of those rare examples that king is very safe on e7. So we play king e7, attacking the knight. Now white has two options here: knight to c4, or white can try to take the pawn on b7. Either one, black has sufficient defense. So let's take a look at knight takes pawn first. Simply bishop takes d2, knight takes d2. It seems as though white is just much better. We have a king in the middle, and white has an extra pawn after knight takes b7. But here we have this very powerful move, queen to b4, hitting the knight and the pawn on b2. White has to play queen b3, giving up the d4 pawn. And now this position is actually quite safe for black. This knight on b7 is deep in enemy territory, and it's going to be very hard to keep it defended. The king on e7 is actually temporarily misplaced, but after we play one of our h rooks to either c8 or b8, we should be able to quickly play king to f8 if needed for a manual castle. But for now, let's take a look at this position after a longside castle. Here we play rook a to b8. We can also play rook h to b8, but I want to keep the rook go to c8, which is a better square. And now the following could happen: queen a3, check, simply c5. Notice that there is no very good move discovery attack for white. And if white plays knight a5, we can simply play rook h to c8, defending against knight c6, knight f3, and here with the next move, black actually, I believe, gets a powerful edge in the endgame with queen to b4. And here, black is better, and the following could happen: queen takes, pawn takes, and it's clear that we have the c-file, much better pawn structure, and the knight on a5 is misplaced, and the king on e7 is actually doing quite nice. So we took a look at the move knight takes b7, and black has no problems. But now let us take a look at the move knight to c4, hitting the queen and gaining another tempo in the opening. Now we simply play bishop takes bishop, knight f takes d2, and here black has two ways to get a comfortable position. One of them is simply to play queen d5, and there is no obvious ways white can try to take advantage of the king on e7. Another way is more thematic, queen to c7, and after white, for example, castles, rook h to d8, creating the retreat for our king. If queen to a3 check, this is again not a problem because of the move c5. And if knight b3, we defend the pawn one more time, b6, and after d takes c, now either knight takes c5 or even pawn takes c5, black is doing quite well. We actually had this position occur in the game between very strong grandmasters, Movsesian against Morozevich, and Movsesian played knight b to a5. He's trying to create play for the bad knight on b3, and Morozevich simply plays king f8. There are no threats. Queen f3, trying to get control over the c6 and b7 squares, but again, this is no worries for black. And after knight d to b6, Morozevich got a very comfortable game where he can actually try to fight for advantage. So let us look at the main line after bishop f4, queen a5 check, bishop d2, bishop b4, c3, bishop e7, c4, queen c7, castle, knight g to f6. And let us talk about this position. So black's plan, as I mentioned earlier, is going to be castle in short, with the possibility to break through with the move b5 and attack the king. So undermining the center and the pawn on c4. Now, what does white do? Well, it's clear that white has a little bit more space. So he wants to utilize his space advantage. In particular, you always have to watch out for the breakthrough with d5. It's very rarely possible, but nevertheless. And a very dangerous attacking idea is moving the knight from g3, or even better to e4, and this move g4, because black is going to be castled short, and this pawn sacrifice is very thematic plan of attack. So we're going to look at that. And the more positional approach is this move king to b1, which is a prophylactic move, typically followed by rook h to e1. So more like centralizing strategy, or immediate rook h to e1. Okay? So let's look at king b1 first. This is the prophylactic approach and the best way to show black his plan. So castles. And now rook h to e1. And notice that white creates a small threat, if you can call it a threat. The rook on e1, this e file, and the bishop on e7 is not defended, which allows white knight f5, immediately solving the problem with bad knight and forcing double pawns and winning the bishop on e7. So this is kind of the idea of the rook on e1. But black has nothing to worry about because he has several ways to counter this. And we like this move a5, creating simple defensive square for the bishop on b4, which kind of makes this knight a little bit useless. So one option here is to play either knight e5, which is also a thematic way to play for white to take over the outpost on e5, or keep the prophylactic game with the bishop to c1, so not to allow the bishop trade. Alright, so let's look at knight to e5 first, just to give you an idea what are some of the typical plans here. So black plays rook a to d8, creating the x-ray with the queen on d3. So it's a good move to play queen e2 now. And here, that's why we have the pawn on a5. After bishop b4, black solves all his opening problems, because his real problem is lack of space, but he already traded one pair of bishops. He's about to trade the dark square bishops and really have no problems. As a matter of fact, all this has happened at the top level between Karyakin and Topalov, two very strong grandmasters. And Karyakin played f4. And again, the theme here is undermining these two pawns, c4 and d4 pawns. That's why you have to be ready to play c5 in the right moment. For now, Topalov plays rook f2 e8, which is a useful move, preventing any sorts of f5 break because it's going to open up the e file. And after Karyakin's a3, this is a perfect time to execute black's plan. Bishop takes d2, rook takes d2, and now c5. So this is very, very good for black. And a few more moves, and Karyakin couldn't find a way to win, and both sides actually agreed to draw. And after rook e to d1, just to quickly show you what happened, c takes d, rook takes d4, knight c5, great outpost for the knight, queen e3, and now the final move to lock down the pawns on b2 and a3, a4. And actually, this is a very equal and drawish position. So we looked at the move knight e5, which is no big deal. And now let us look at the move recently played by Leko, bishop to c1. He played this against Ivanchuk, and again, the main idea is to avoid the bishop trade after bishop to b4. So Ivanchuk played rook f to d8. Again, either way, rook a to d8 or rook f to d8 is played in the game. Black can choose, but it's simply a matter of taste. Queen c2, and now Ivanchuk plays a4. So he is trying to create some threats on the queen side. And again, knight f5 is no big deal because now we have a hide square for the bishop on f8, and knight on f5 really has no future there. So Black will play knight e5, very similar as to Karyaki and Topalov game, but Ivanchuk simply took, pawn takes, and played rook takes d1, queen takes d1. Notice that if rook takes d1, which simply drops a pawn, so Leko takes, queen takes d1, and now after the move knight d7, Black has a great game. He's going to play knight c5, he can fight for the d file, and really there is no way White can get any counter play. As a matter of fact, I think Black is already slightly better. So we looked at the move king to b1, which is a prophylactic move and doesn't create any problems for Black. But now let us look at a more, you can say, dangerous move, rook h to e1. Well, now of course Black can castle, but he kind of has to worry about knight f5, as I mentioned earlier, and here we don't have the pawn on a5, so we really have to give up this bishop on e7. But the move that I recommend and has been played by top grandmasters with great success is, remember I mentioned how the pawn on c4 is rather a weakness that Black can use to try to undermine the center and open up the queen side. And the move that is very strong here is immediate b5. So you're kind of posing a question, does White close up the position and play c5, which gives up the d5 outpost forever? Does White take the pawn and open up the c file, or does White do nothing? So this is kind of a dilemma that White has to choose what to do. So let's look at the two options, c5 and c takes b. So c takes b is more forced. Pawn takes, check. King to b1. And now Black simply plays castle. Notice that Black wants to sacrifice the pawn on b5. He already has a c file open, and now he's going to have the b file for his rooks. So White really has no other option than to take the pawn or to play knight to f5. So besides taking the pawn, which is very dangerous, of course, White can try to play knight f5 here. And as a matter of fact, knight f5 has been played, and we're gonna take a look at this position. But if White simply takes the pawn on b5, Black plays rook a to b8, and if queen a5, we can either play rook b6 with the idea to double up our rooks, or avoid the exchange with the move queen to b7. It is clear that Black has all the chances for attack, and White can't really do much. He has two pieces stuck on the king side. Black can quickly transfer his knight, and control of the b file as well as the c file should be more than enough compensation. So let's go back and take a look at this move knight f5, which is the only way to try to fight for advantage if you're White. So here we can simply take on f5, which is actually much stronger than the move rook f to e8, which actually happened in the game Akopian against Solak. And the reason why taking on f5 in this particular instance is good is because we are going to put our knight on e4 and have very strong place for our pieces. But let's take a look at this move. Rook takes e7, queen to d6, now rook back to e2. And again, notice that if white tries to keep the rook on e7, after doubling up, knight to e4 really seals the fate of this rook. Now it's very hard for white to do anything. So the best move is simply to drive back. So for example, rook e2. And now, after a simple queen d5, defending both pawns, we have about even position. The knight is going to go to e4, and it's unclear how white can try to take advantage of the doubled pawns. So this position is simply good for black. So we just looked at c takes b. The knight is actually on g3. So we just looked at c takes b, and this doesn't give white any advantage. So let us look at the move c5. At first, this looks like a mistake because white simply gives up the d5 square. But on the other hand, with the move c5, white completely stops black's attack on the queen side. So let's take a look what happens here. Castles. Now let's take a look at the move king b1. If knight to f5, again, we're not afraid. Pawn takes, rook takes e7. And here we have a very powerful move. Knight takes pawn. Because if rook takes queen, knight takes d3, followed by taking the pawn on f2, and actually white is totally collapsing here. So white has to play queen e2, and now it's okay to simply go back. So black just won a pawn, knight goes back to d7, and as the game Leko Karpov, black is doing at least equal, if not better. So this shows that knight f5 has no venom. And instead, white makes a prophylactic move so that knight takes d3 is not with check, king to b1. And now black can play several moves, but the move which we like is the move a5. And the following could happen. Either the move knight f5 or knight to e2, which actually has been played in a recent game between two very strong grandmasters, Stelwagen and Yakovenko. So as I mentioned, the Stelwagen Yakovenko game, knight e2, but let's take a quick look again at knight f5, which yet again not a problem for black, even with the king on b1. Knight takes, rook takes e7, knight takes d3, and if rook takes e6, knight takes f2, h5 pawn is hanging, by the way, and black is doing great. So this is definitely not a problem for black. But knight e2 is a simple idea to try to create counterplay with the move g4. So in this position, after knight e2, let's take a look what options black has. The move which Yakovenko played is, I think, the best. He actually plays this move, knight to g4. But one thing I want to mention is that taking the pawn on h5 is always bad, because after g4, knight back g5, you kind of give away the free attack to white, because white is going to have rook coming to h1 on g1, two open files against the king, which is basically very, very strong attack. So taking the pawn on h5 is definitely a bad idea. And after knight g4, there is nothing better but rook f1. This game continued rook f to d8, threatening a little knight takes c5, queen c2, and now b4. So Yakovenko is playing on the whole board. He attacked the f2 pawn, neutralized the rook. Now he's playing b4 to take away the c3 square, and black has actually a fine game. As a matter of fact, after a passive move by white, Yakovenko took advantage and played e5 and actually got plenty of counterplay and ended up actually winning the game. So this variation shows you that if white tries to play rook h2 e1, don't really be afraid of knight f5, especially after the move b5. And if white plays c5, closes the position, then knight f5 is really not even a possibility because of the lines that we looked at after e takes f and knight takes c5. So if white tries to play with knight e2, it's kind of passive too. After knight g4, black gets plenty of counterplay and has a very good game. So we have covered the prophylactic king b1, the positional rook h2 e1, and actually the position black hasn't castled yet, but this leaves us with the most aggressive plan that starts with the move knight e4 with the idea to sack the pawn with g4. So after knight e4, castles, g4. This is actually a novelty that has been introduced very recently at the Grand Prix FIDE tournament by Caro against none other than Caro Kann specialist Peter Leko. So white's idea is actually quite simple. He wants to sacrifice a pawn and get the g file for his rooks. So black has to be very careful, but again, analysis together with the strongest engine in the world, Rybka, showed that there is nothing to worry about. Black has more than sufficient resources for defense, but even further, black can actually get a big advantage. So let's take a look. Knight takes pawn. Now, Caro plays queen e2 first, which is usually transposition, f5, and then he plays rook d to h1. So he wants to keep the rook on h1. So Leko finds what I think is the best move in the position. He plays rook a to e8. It is actually possible to take the piece, but we don't want to go into all the details because black has to be very careful, whereas rook to e8 is very simple and elegant way to prove to white that he has no attack whatsoever. and black is actually fighting for the initiative. So Caro didn't find anything better but knight e1. And here, black plays e5. Very, very strong way to open up the position. And it's not even clear who is fighting for initiative, because the sacked pawn kind of backfired, and now it's white who has to defend. So after knight g3, black played e takes d, which is a good move, and black still has a fine game. But we think a more accurate way to play is to play bishop g5 first. And the idea of bishop g5 is if bishop takes, we have this intermezzo move, e takes d, hitting the queen. So queen d2, and now h takes g, queen takes g5. Black has a very, very strong move, queen to d8. Because notice that endgames are in favor for black, and if white tries to avoid the exchange of queens, he really gets into deep trouble. For example, move queen f4. Loses on the spot after the move knight to c5. So this is really funny that white sacked the pawn, but in reality he is totally hopeless because of a threat. Rook takes e1 check and knight to d3. And really the position is completely lost for white. His pieces are totally misplaced, and if you play something like king d1, black can simply play d3, potentially d2, and dominate in the game. So again, this shows you that even in the most aggressive line, knight e4 and g4, introduced by Caro, black has plenty of defensive resources. As a matter of fact, knight takes g4 and f5 is very, very thematic. And if you analyze this position further with a strong chess engine, you will see that it is white who has to struggle to find defensive moves. Okay, so let us go over what we covered so far. So again, either knight c3 or knight d2, it doesn't matter. We take on d4. This is the classical variation. Knight g3, h4, h6, knight f3, knight d7, h5, bishop h7, bishop d3, bishop takes, queen takes, and the move here is e6 rather than knight gf6. And if bishop f4, this allows us to play queen a5, bishop g2, bishop b4. So we looked at this variation, but now what if white is aware of the problems or rather good positions that black gets in that line and plays a more subtle bishop d2, preventing queen from going to a5? Well, the only difference is the pawn is going to stay on c2 and black's queen is going to stay on d8, but the position and the plans remain the same. So let's take a look what happens next. So knight gf6, castle, bishop e7. Again, we want to play short side castle where the king is nice and safe. And here, this is another, you can say, similar topical line. So again, the pawn is on c2 and the queen is on d8, but white still have the same plans. He can play king b1, he can play c4, rook h2 e1, and queen to e2. So we cannot look at all of these moves, but you can simply look at the other line and notice that black's plan is very similar. But for now, let us focus on the move queen a2, which is gaining popularity and is the most topical line these days. So here we play immediate c5, okay? So the key here is to undermine the powerful pawn on d4. And now white has the main move rook h2 e1. White can try to take on c5, but after queen c7, black simply delays the recapture on c5. The pawn is not going anywhere. If white tries to defend it, this is simply suicidal. The queen side is totally ruined. So something like king b1 could happen. Black again doesn't take the pawn immediately, castles. If bishop c3, knight takes c5, and black gets a very good game. As a matter of fact, there was a game between Vlad Kachov and Vlad Kramnik, two Vlads, in the Tau Memorial Blitz tournament. So this is Blitz chess, but nevertheless, the interesting finish is very instructive. Rook d4, rook fd8, rook h d1, and here Kramnik plays knight d5 and actually gets an extremely easy game. As a matter of fact, after bishop e1, bishop f6, Tkachov is in deep trouble. He plays rook c4, and here Kramnik could have finished the game with a neat move knight to f4. Notice that the queen is guarding the rook on d1, and so if rook takes d8, rook takes d8, in order to avoid back rank mate, such as queen f1, rook d1, white has to sack the exchange, and of course this is simply winning for black. So let's go back to the position where we played c5. And also notice that black plays c5 immediately. He doesn't even castle. And the reason why is he wants to decide the fate of the pawn on d4. He wants to immediately undermine that pawn. So the main line is rook h2 e1 with the idea to create powerful battery on the e file and enable the option of knight f5, castle, knight f5, and here it seems that white is doing good. Why? Well, if we take on e5, if we take on f5, then after queen takes e7, this endgame slightly favors white. And if we don't take on f5, for example, if c takes d, then you really have to watch out for very, very strong knight 3 takes d4. And if you play bishop c5, it looks as though black is doing great. The knight on f5 is hanging, and there is no move, because if the knight moves, then the knight on d4 is hanging. But this is still not over, and white has a very strong piece sacrifice. Knight takes pawn, pawn takes, and bishop takes h6. There was a recent game at the highest level by two 2700s, Gashimov against Yakovenko, and Yakovenko actually struggled but still managed to get a draw. Well, we believe that while black black's position is defendable, it's really no need to go into this mess. And instead, if we go back, so we have this position, the knight is on f5, and instead, black has nothing to worry about after the very strong move rook to e8. Now the sack is not as strong because the rook is no longer in f8, and if white plays knight takes e7, getting the bishop, queen takes e7, black has a very comfortable position. And if white plays c4, c takes d. Again, notice that taking the pawn on h5 is simply bad because of the move g4, g5, and now black is in trouble. He has to really struggle to defend now, but rather more pragmatic, pawn takes, knight takes, and simply queen c5 gives black great game. He's going to attack the weak c4 pawn, the weak h5 pawn, and the bishop to c3. He can actually not take the pawn right away, but simply play a6. The pawn is not going anywhere, and get a great position. Again, e5 is a possibility, rook a to c8 is a possibility, and white doesn't have any advantage whatsoever. So this concludes the major variation, which is the classical line with the bishop to f4, and now we just covered the bishop to d2. Now we have covered the lines after e4, c6, d4, d5, knight c3 or knight d2, d takes e, knight takes e4, bishop f5, knight g3, bishop g6, h4, and so forth. This leaves us with some of the more rare lines that you have to know about, but yet they could occur in your games. So, for example, e4, c6, d4, d5, f3. So let's cover this first, and then we will go on to more common lines such as e takes d, or which is not as popular as the next move, the advanced variation, e5. But for now, let's take a look at the move f3. So f3 is a more gambit-like move because it allows, or white wants to lure black into playing this gambit line. And now after knight f3, e takes d, bishop c4, if white player is well prepared and black doesn't know what he's doing, you can quickly get in big trouble. So that's why we recommend instead of taking on e4, we recommend to play the move e6. Although it may seem counterintuitive, you're closing up your dark square bishop, but in reality, this is a very strong move because you can always develop your bishop via a6 and have a great game. So let's take a look at the main line, knight c3, and now you use this opportunity to pin the knight immediately with the move bishop to b4. And here, white's best try is to develop his bishop on f4. If he plays passive move bishop e3, you can take on e4 and play queen h4 check. And if g3 after queen takes e4, this is already over. So again, white has to be careful. And if he tries to duel with bishop to d3, then taking on e4, pawn takes is bad because of queen takes d4. And this is, again, losing the pawn. So that's why white has to play bishop to f4. And here we simply develop with the move knight f6. Again, e4 is now hanging. And now white typically plays queen to d3 with idea to castle long. And now black can play b6, which is one way to develop with potentially bishop to a6. But we actually recommend a different plan. We recommend castle first, castles, and now our novelty is the move b5. This is very strong attacking idea, and our plan involves dropping the bishop to e7, b4, hitting the knight, and also opening up the bishop going to a6. So this is b5 is a very, very powerful plan. One thing to mention is that black can also win the pawn. And now d takes e, pawn takes, knight e4, queen e1, and f5. But even though black has an extra pawn after, for example, knight f3, control of the dark squares gives white more than enough compensation, especially the dark square bishop on f4, control over the e5 square, and also potential to undermine with g4. Whereas bishop on c8 is just a passive piece. So we don't recommend taking the pawn, even though it's playable, but instead the move b7 to b5. So what could happen? Well, let's say white continues with his development, knight g2. Now this is a move that is part of our plans. Bishop drops back to e7, preparing b4. Well, the opposite side castles dictate that white has to play on the king side, so he starts his attack with the move g4. Notice that moves such as a3 only help black because after a5 and b4, black is going to open up more files and have a very strong attack. So let's take a look, for example, at this analysis, g4. Now b4 attacking the knight. And here, white can try to play knight a4 or knight b1. In either case, black gets a powerful initiative and stands much better. For example, knight a4, bishop a6, hitting the queen, queen e3, queen a5. White has nothing better than to play b3, as queen b3 simply loses to bishop c4. So b3, and after bishop to b5, black is going to win a pawn and still have a powerful attack. Now, what about knight to b1? So let's go back. So after b4, knight to b1. Again, black has very same plan. He plays bishop to a6, queen a3, and then queen a5. a2 pawn is doomed. If you play a3, again, these exchanges only help black, The more files open up, the better. And if white tries to sack the pawn on a2, it's very hard to even make that happen, because if white tries to play bishop g5 with potential idea e5, we can now even take on e4, and now it's clear that taking on e4 is actually losing. Knight takes g4, hitting the queen, and then bishop on g5 is totally lost. So this concludes the f3 variation. And again, please pay attention to the plan with b5, bishop e7, and b4, and this gives black very strong attacking chances.
This is Roman, I am back, and we have two variations left. Two variations that can be seriously considered for white to play. Left, it's after e4, c6, d4, d5. Taking on d5, followed by bishop d3, knight c6, c3, knight f6. This is one variation for white. And the second variation is after e4, c6, d4, d5, the e5 move. Now, after e5 and bishop f5, there are a few continuations for white. What I want to say here is this. This variation, e5, was very popular years ago. And what we cannot do here, we cannot analyze everything, every move, and every variation. We are analyzing variations where white supposedly have some advantage or create some problems for black. This variation e5 does not create some problems for black, and we don't have any our own analysis or refutations of white's plan, of white's e5 variation, because it doesn't need one. We're still going to go briefly through this and show you basics, how we should play this position, but the rest, if you really think this variation creates some problems for white, then you have to get some opening manuals and some sample games to help you, because in an hour and a half DVD we cannot cover every variation of such a big opening as Caro can. So let's go with e5 and bishop f5. Here is Eugene.
And now white can choose one of the two most popular setups. This is the super aggressive setup that starts with knight c3.
This continuation was very popular and developed by number of grandmasters, such as, and a leader of the strongest player probably played this knight c3 variation for years was Shirov. But black has several plays they can play to get reasonably good position.
And now we play e6. And here white starts immediate attack against the light square bishop with the move g4. And after bishop g6...
And I have to point that g4, the only move that would make any sense in this position, it's a kind of way to justify putting knight on a relatively bad position on c3, because from c3, knight doesn't have any active squares to go to. And the only purpose for knight c3 move will be to prevent black from going bishop to e4. And that's why g4 move is the move that makes sense here.
And after bishop g6, white plays knight g2.
Now, why knight g2? Because going h4 is not going to do any good for a white, because after h5, white has a problem with the g4 pawn, and there is no good way to solve this problem, because taking on h5, obviously, all it will do just destroy white's pawn structure, and playing g5, it will be just advancing these pawns for not opening position, and after possible bishop f5 and g6, black has great position. So that's why white plays knight e2, and now they are intending to go h4, and if black plays h5, then knight f4, creating some problems. So back to knight e2 move.
So now black strikes the center with the move c5. And white now has two options. He can go for the bishop with h4 or play bishop e3 first. We're going to cover the h4 move because this is more forced and you have to know a little bit how to defend against it. h5, knight f4, hitting the bishop, and here black sacrifices the pawn with the move bishop to h7. This is a positional sacrifice because he is fighting in the center and destroying white's pawns. So after knight takes h5,
I have to point here that we don't give you concrete, long, and not detailed analysis. We just give you the directions.
And after knight takes h5, black simply plays knight to c6.
Continuing putting maximum pressure on white's weakened center pawn structure.
And after pawn takes c5, black can simply take bishop takes c5, not being afraid of knight takes g7. And
after knight takes g7, king f8, white is going to have a lot of problems. Knight is hanging, of course it has to move, and now e5 pawn is hanging. There is a possible queen b6 attacking f2 pawn, and
also d4 is a possibility.
d4 is a possibility. Black has a lot of counterplay, and it's not advised for white to take this g7 pawn.
So white can try to play with the move bishop b5.
This is kind of a protecting indirectly e5 pawn, trying to preserve the center.
And black continues his attack with the move queen c7. Bishop takes knight. And now we can take with the pawn or the queen. For example, queen takes pawn with idea d4. And white has tried move queen f3 in this position, but we believe that after either king f8 or a more aggressive castle, black just stands slightly better in all variations.
Well, I think white simply has a very dangerous position here. They are not castle, and their pieces are scattered all over the board, and I wouldn't want to have this position for white.
And so this concludes the aggressive line with the knight c3 and g4. And now we're going to look at the more positional move, knight to f3. So let's go back. So after bishop f5, move knight to f3. This is recently the most popular continuation in the advanced e5 line.
After e6, which is the most natural move, bishop e2, knight d7.
Knight d7, that's correct.
There are several different ways to play for black, but that's what we would recommend. I think the easiest way for equality. Castle, knight to e7. Black's plan to go c5 and knight c6 eventually.
And now white has two options. Knight bd2, simply finishing his development, or trying to go for the bishop with the move knight h4. And again, moves such as knight h4 is nothing to be worried about, because we simply play bishop back to g6.
And I don't think we should go much farther with this position, because black has very solid position. They are a little bit cramped, but c5 is coming. Knight will go to c6, or maybe even knight to f5. Black has comfortable development, and c5 possible counterplay. White cannot expect to get any advantage by playing knight f3, then knight h4, and then taking this bishop on g6. If you want more information, you can always surf the database and see some sample games and get a proof from there. Well, this briefly will end the E5, the preview of E5 variation. And the last I want to mention is after H4, C6, D4, D5, ED, CD, and we are not going to cover C4 as it's a pawn of attack, but the reason why we're not going to cover here in the Caro Kann, because positions after C4, knight F6 here, this particular position, you can get from various different openings. You can get it from Queen's Gambit declined. You can get sometimes, if black plays G6, from Grunfeld defense, from center counter, even from Sicilian. So there are so many ways you can get this position. So it's kind of, I don't think it's right to say this is Caro Kann position. This is not Caro Kann position. This is universal position from various different openings. And I think you definitely should know how to play this position, and I will definitely cover it on one of our DVDs. And I don't think it belongs right into a Caro Kann defense. So, but we want to cover after EDC the bishop D3 move. Now, I have made a DVD where I suggested this variation, bishop D3, C3, and bishop F4 for white. I advocated to play, but the reason for that was not because white is getting clear advantage or any advantage. White, certainly, if they play correctly, they are not going to get any disadvantage. But this is an easy way if you have to learn a quick way. It's like a Caro Kann for dummies. So what do you play here? Bishop D3, and when black goes knight C6, you go C3, and then bishop F4. All you have to know how to develop knight F3, knight D2, and then castle short. But notice, if black played this variation, this position incorrectly, black can get serious disadvantage. One of the ways to play this position, for example, e6 is a bad way to play, locking the bishop out. One of the okay ways is queen c7 move to stop white from playing bishop f4, and I have suggested the knight f3, bishop g4, knight d2. Even here, black is doing okay, and on knight f6, I suggested knight f1 with idea knight g3 and h3. But even here, if black plays e5 or e6 and bishop d6 followed by e5, position will be approximately equal. Black does not have any problem here. This is one of the ways to play against this variation. And the other way, which is knight f6, bishop f4, and g6, is also very playable variations. It's Eugene's favorite, and I will give him a word to explain ideas behind the g6 variation. That's something we covered also for white. Position is definitely not bad for white, but black has equality. c3, bishop d3 and bishop f4 is not ambitious way to play against Caro Kann, and black should be able to get full equality. Now let Eugene explain the details of the g6 variation.
So after g6, black creates a very strong buffer against any attack that may come, and he is ready to develop quite nicely with bishop g7 castle, followed by potential knight h5 and e5 push in the center. In addition, he can also play bishop f5 and try to exchange light square bishops and try to play with the pawn structure, which is quite solid. And the following could happen: knight f3, bishop g7, knight bd2, for example, castle. And
here white has two moves. When I suggested this variation for white, I said let's go h3, and on bishop f5 we exchange pawns and go g4. This is one way to play for black, but Eugene recommends here knight h5 move.
Yeah, this is a very simple way to get a comfortable position. White has to play bishop h2 or bishop e3. If bishop e3, black has a chance to play e5.
Maybe even f5. I have had this played against me, and after knight b3, f4, bishop d2, and now e5, which is okay for black as well. So this is not serious problem for black. So bishop h2.
Yep. Keeping an eye on the e5 square. And here, the move that I recommend is bishop to h6.
Now notice that if white's bishop was on c2, black is probably losing. After g4 move, black may be losing a piece because on knight f6 is g5.
And the same
on knight g7. But after, when bishop is on d3, black has knight f4, hitting the d3 bishop.
And now white can try to play either castle, or as a recent game between two grandmasters, knight f1, which is kind of awkward way to play in the opening, that was immediately punished by black. But let us take a look at castle first. Knight f4, and now, of course, if bishop takes f4, bishop takes f4, black has no problems. And if white tries to play, for example, bishop b5, we can follow up with queen b6. And again, black has very easy play. So let us take a look at the move knight f1 from a recent grandmaster game. And black plays knight f4, knight e3, and now black immediately uses his advantage in the center and plays e5.
It's obvious once what black made e5 in this position, white cannot even dream of getting any advantage.
And after d takes e, the game continued. d4, again, very strong move. Bishop takes knight, bishop takes f4, c takes d, knight takes d4, and now e5 pawn is gonna fall, and white.
Black is gonna have two bishop advantage, two bishop pair, and black is guaranteed at least small advantage. That's not the way to play for white. Obviously, black does not have any problems with ED, CD, bishop D3 variation, and black has fairly good position. Now, to summarize all the material we have covered, and thanks Eugene for working hard on gathering this material, I have to tell you this. This is not the sharp opening. This is a quiet opening, quiet way for black to equalize in the opening, and it's positional play. You don't get very active positions for black, but you restrict white's activity as well. And there is a good chance of positionally outplaying your opponent who may be overly aggressive or just inaccurate, simply. In our opinion, Caro Kann is maybe one of the top openings to play against e4, and it has as good a chance to equalize for black as any other opening that exists. One more variation is when white plays knight c3, d5, and knight f3. Now, we have to play a little differently here from the main variation. For example, if we play d takes e, knight takes e4, and bishop f5, that's how we play when knight is on g1 and pawn is on d4. However, this is a bit different because the reason we don't like to play like this because knight goes to g3, bishop g6, h4, h6. And remember, this is the correct position for us to play when pawn is on d4 and knight is on g1. However, in this position, black has serious problem. After knight e5, bishop h7, and queen to h5. And black has to play g6. And now white can play simply bishop c4, threatening mate on f7. And after the e6, queen f3, bishop is terrible on h7. It's bad position for black. So therefore, the correct way to play for black, actually one of the good ways to play for black, is to bishop g4. And after h3, we have to take the knight on f3. We do not want to play bishop h5 because white gets an advantage after e takes d, cd, g4, bishop g6, bishop b5, check, knight c6, knight e5, and after queen c7, d4, creating some problems due to h4, h5 threat. So I think we should avoid this continuation and play simply bishop takes f3 in this position. In this position, we should play bishop takes f3, queen takes f3. It's just brief guide through this variation, e6. And after d3, we simply go bishop b4. Well, this is where white has to play bishop d2. Queen g3, we have to point quickly that is a bad idea because of knight f6. And queen takes g7, in this case, simply losing the piece. After rook g8, queen h6, d4, and if white plays a3, black has bishop to f8, winning the knight on c3. This is all known, and white cannot play queen g3 in this position, so the correct move bishop d2, and after bishop d2 we want to play d4 and knight b1, queen b6. Now this is a good way to play for black, and on queen g3 the queen g3 move was played, and according to Ripka, and Ripka recommends here knight f6 move, and queen takes g7 is not a good idea. Black has an advantage after rook g8, queen takes f6, and bishop e7. Queen h6, white is up a piece, but after queen takes b2, queen h7, and rook f8, black is, after bishop e2, queen takes a1, castle, and knight d7, white is not doing so well, because even if they get the exchange back, actually in this case they cannot even get the exchange back because of knight f6 and rook g8. White simply here doesn't have compensation for a deficit of exchange. Well, this briefly covers almost every continuation in Caro Kann. Remember, we skipped Panov Botvinnik attack. We will be covering in one of our upcoming DVDs, because the Panov Botvinnik attack can be we can get from various different openings. Now, in a conclusion, I want to take a look at two games typical for this Caro Kann. This game was played in 2008, just a few months ago, between two top players, Leko and Ivanchuk. I have to point now that Ivanchuk and Topalov, some top players in the world, they play more and more Caro Kann because obviously they have done fair amount of research and they start liking it and they get positions that are equal or very close to that. So now let's look at Leko Ivanchuk. Ivanchuk is black. E4, C6, D4, D5. Knight C3, D takes E. Knight takes C4, bishop F5. Knight G3 and bishop G6. H4, H6. Knight F3, Knight D7. H5, bishop H7. This is one of the main variations. Bishop takes D3. Queen takes D3, E6, bishop F4, Queen A5, check, bishop D2, bishop B4, just as Eugene mentioned in analysis, C3, bishop E7, C4, Queen C7, white castles long, and knight F6. King B1, castle, rook H to E1, and A5. Bishop C1 was played by Leko, and notice that Leko is very solid player, and he has a solid position, very well known position. However, he lost this game. Rook F2 D8. Queen C2, A4, Knight E5. And very well played by black. Knight takes E5, D takes E. Rook takes D1, forcing to take with the queen because of E5 pawn. Rook couldn't take. Now, after Queen takes D1, Knight D7, attacking E5 pawn, and after F4, Knight C5. In our opinion, black is better here. Black has the D file, and white is overextended, and H5, F4 pawns may be potential weaknesses very soon. Knight E4, Rook D8, Queen C2, Knight takes C4, Rook takes C4, Queen B6. And here we see white is overextended and may have weaknesses after Queen to G1. Queen B6, white took the pawn, and after Queen G1, Queen C2, Rook D1, black has very strong initiative. There is no immediate threat, but white has to protect all those pawns as well as the back rank. So position, in my opinion, is bad, and I was even surprised why it lasted as long as they did. Rook E2, Rook F1, A3. Well, in this position, Rook takes F4 is very good, but Ivanchuk thought that he doesn't have to take it yet. He wanted to improve position with bishop C5. Queen D2, Rook D1, Queen C2, bishop D4, C5, Rook F1. White is now, I think, lost. After Rook F1, Rook D2, Rook takes F4, pawn fell eventually, and King A2, Rook F2, Rook takes F2, Bishop takes F2. And after g4, bishop takes c5, and bishop f4, queen d4. Now black has extra pawn, better pawn structure, and big positional advantage. White is totally lost. We don't need to go to the end of the game because they're looking at this game, it served the purpose. We see black got very good position right after the opening and won the game convincingly. Now, I want to go to another game, and you see how the positional opening, such as Caro can you expect only like positional play, black is equalizing or getting, a little better position on certain weaknesses or squares. Here is completely opposite from here, the way the game was developed. Game was played between Indian Grandmaster Ganguly and very promising young grandmaster Dmitry Yakovenko. d4, d5, knight d2, de, knight takes e4, bishop f5, knight g3, bishop g6. Yakovenko is black. h4, h6, knight f3, knight d7. h5, bishop d3, bishop h7, bishop d3, bishop takes, queen takes. Same way, everything, e6, bishop d2 this time, not bishop f4. Bishop d2. And what happened here is knight f6, castle, bishop e7, c4, black castle, white went king b1, and b5. Actually, you didn't mention this game in the analysis. You see, here white played c takes b, and queen takes b5. I think this is a mistake. Why black gets very powerful attack. Imagine like in Banco Gambit, when you have open A and B file, in this case B file, you're going to have powerful knight on d5, and all black's pieces going to attack white king. Terrible misjudgment of position by white. I think in this position, white is almost busted. a5, trying to push a pawn in upcoming attack for upcoming. a5, knight e5, knight takes e5, d takes e, and knight d5. Powerful knight, b file, and all pieces coming into attack. This has to be decisive. And after knight d5, knight e2 was played, rook b8, queen c6, queen takes a5. It's interestingly, well, it's bad move because it just opens another file, so that's not a good idea. So queen c6 was played, and now bishop a3, bishop c1, queen e7. You see queen is going to be coming into play with queen b4 like this, and rook coming to c8. Every black's piece is in attack. White is absolutely lost in this position. Rook h3, rook fc8, queen a4, queen c7. Queen cannot take on a3 because queen c2 check. And if rook takes, then white wins with rook b4 because queen has to leave the c2 square. And this is hopeless. So in this position, after queen c7, white played rook d2. And after rook b4, or bishop d4 rather, rook d2, d3, queen takes c5. We can stop it right here. Black got their pawn back, knight is hanging, this pawn is weak, and black has very powerful attack on white's king. This is a good demonstration of the power of b5 move and the pawn sacrifice. So, summarizing everything, we can say that Caro Kann is just as good of opening as any other. And based on latest results, we would say that black is getting very good positions, and we would recommend to play it. Now I think it's white's turn to find anything, any advantage in any of these variations. Well, the analysis were supported by Ripka, and Ripka herself doesn't see any sizable advantage in any of these variations. So we would suggest to play Caro Kann, and if you play it correctly, you should be getting very satisfactory positions. Thank you.